I've given a number of large talks recently in the last year and a half or so about this book. And the way I frame it is I set myself against a series of thinkers who are making an argument that I find wrong, which is that it is no longer possible to have a free government. That government has become so big and so bureaucratic and so corrupt and so capitalist that you can't have a free government. And so the only way to be free in the 21st century is through protest, by setting yourself against the government. So the three main thinkers who've made this argument, in my understanding, are Jacques Rancière, Simon Critchley, and David Graeber. And they've all, in interesting ways, riffed on Arendt, but all disagree with Arendt on this fundamental idea that you can create free government. And what they say is, since you can't, and since there's this paralysis that Daphne is talking about, the only way we can have the experience of being free, right? Arendt says the experience of being free through the townships and through constitutions and stuff. They say it's through protest, through mass action. And I understand their frustration. I do. I understand their deep paralysis and feeling of disenfranchisement. But I think that turning to protest is the wrong avenue. And so, to me, Micah White, who spoke at the conference last week, is a much more interesting figure, because he's someone who said, "Look, I did the protest thing, and when I realized, even though it felt good, it's not what I want. And what I want is to go back into local government and take power." And he says, "Look, forget the protest. Go run for your local mayor. Go run for your local town council. Go run for your local board." And that to me is a much more meaningful and attractive approach to the idea of paralysis than just endless protest is. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on any of that. I'm sure there was a lot in there.
Roger, I want to comment on, again, the idea that we've lost this idea of citizenship. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think that we've been sort of socially engineered out of the idea of citizenship. We're not taught what women went through to get the vote. We're not taught what Black people went through. We're not taught that as participants in our schools that we are citizens who are expected throughout our lives to give back. So I don't think it's just sort of accidental loss.
I wondered about that, Susan. I mean, I think, look, I think it's an important thing. We have to be taught these things. We have to be taught examples of citizenship. You can't tell people to be citizens. They have to be shown examples of it, right? I mean, this is the old Kantian insight where he writes to his dear Professor Sulzberger and says, who asks him, "How do you teach people the moral law?" And he says, "You can't teach them it except by doing it. You learn it by example." He says, examples are the go-karts of moral obligation. It's a great little line. But so I absolutely do believe with you that young people and others have to be exposed to examples of citizenship. I wonder if you're right that they're not. I mean, my kids come home writing about Martin Luther King and protesters. And one of my kids wrote about the Black Panther movement, a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they are constantly being, heroship and courage. I mean, the theme of their school this year is courage, right? Citizen and moral courage. But so I could be wrong. Now it's collaboration. My daughter tells me in the background, I got a peanut gallery here. So maybe I wonder, I'd like to know why you think we're not teaching people that, I guess is my question.
I guess just the fact that so many people in this country don't vote. And I think that if they really understood what we had to go through to get the vote, it would be more valued, but also because I think it's not just the example, I think it's the experience. And so I think we treat children, um, you know, as incapable of being participants very early on. We don't want that kind of power with children in schools, I don't think. That if they actually were empowered, it would make it a lot more difficult. So I think that we have to experience that kind of citizenship from the get-go. And I gave the example of, growing up as in fifth grade being a safety and crossing the littler kids.
Right.
So they got to school safely. That was, an experience of being responsible. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I don't have little kids anymore. Your children's school sounds kind of ideal. So I don't know that that's going on, but I have tried in our school district to introduce some of these things and have not had a lot of success, and certainly don't see that happening here in Charlottesville.